Every remarkable career begins with a first step. For Daniel Omondi, that step began 20 years ago as an intern in the insurance industry. From those humble beginnings, he rose through the ranks, learning, leading, and building a reputation for excellence, until he eventually became a chief customer officer at one of Kenya's leading insurance companies. For 2 decades, he worked from within the insurance industry. He understood its systems, its customers, its challenges, its opportunities, and the people who make the industry work. But after 20 years of employment, Daniel made a bold decision. He walked away from a successful executive career and chose to build something of his own, a decision that comes with freedom, but also uncertainty, experience, but also new challenges, and the responsibility of building a business from the ground up. What does it feel like to leave a secure executive position after 20 years? What did he learn on the journey from intern to the executive boardroom? What does he believe is working in Kenya's insurance industry? And what needs to change? What does the future hold for a man who has spent 2 decades helping build an insurance company and is now preparing to build his own insurance brokerage? Today, he sits down with our very own Nancy Wambui for a candid interview. Welcome to Insurance World TV's Executive Interviews.
Mr. Daniel Omondi, welcome to Insurance World TV, and thank you for honoring our invite.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. Although I must admit, it feels slightly strange to be sitting on this side of the table. For 20 years, I was usually the person being interviewed or involved in interviews from the corporate side. Today, I am the guest.
And yesterday was your last day at SPICL Insurance Company Limited. How does it feel to wake up and not have to report to work?
It is still sinking in. For 20 years, my body had a routine. Wake up, prepare for work, check the day's schedule, deal with customers, attend meetings, solve problems, make decisions. So today, there is a strange feeling of freedom, but also responsibility. Because yesterday, if there was a problem, I knew I was part of a large organization with systems and teams. Today, the next decision is mine, and the consequences are mine too.
Let's go back to the beginning. You joined the company as an intern. What did Daniel Omondi look like 20 years ago?
Very different from the person you see today. I was young, ambitious, and eager to prove myself, but I was also inexperienced. I knew the theory, I had studied, but insurance is one of those industries where the classroom only gives you the foundation. The real education begins when you sit across from a customer whose business has just burnt down, or a family whose breadwinner has died, or a client whose vehicle has been involved in a serious accident. That is when you understand that insurance is not simply a policy document. There are real lives behind those documents.
You started as an intern and eventually became Chief Customer Officer. What were the major turning points in that journey?
I would identify 3. The first was learning the technical side of insurance. You cannot lead an insurance business if you do not understand the business. I had to understand underwriting, claims, policy wordings, risk, distribution, and customer behavior. The second was learning people. At some point, technical knowledge is no longer enough. You have to understand your team, you have to understand customers, you have to understand management, you have to understand the board, and you have to learn how to bring different people together. The third was learning responsibility. As you rise through an organization, your mistakes become more expensive. As an intern, your mistake may affect one task. As an executive, a decision can affect thousands of customers and hundreds of employees. That changes the way you think.
What is one lesson you learned as an intern that you still carry today?
Never underestimate any role. I have worked with people who were not senior executives, but who understood the business better than many executives. A receptionist may know more about customer frustrations than a senior manager. A claims officer may know exactly where the system is failing. A driver may know what customers are saying outside the office. Leadership requires humility. You cannot learn if you believe you already know everything.
You eventually became Chief Customer Officer. What exactly does a Chief Customer Officer do?
The title can vary from one organization to another, but fundamentally, the Chief Customer Officer is responsible for ensuring that the customer's voice is represented in the organization. Insurance is traditionally organized around departments. Underwriting has its responsibilities, claims has its responsibilities, finance has its responsibilities, technology has its responsibilities. But the customer does not experience your organization as separate departments. The customer experiences one company. So the role is to ask, where does the customer experience friction? Why does a claim take so long? Why is a customer asked for the same information 3 times? Why does a customer not understand the policy? Why are we making the customer work so hard to receive a service? Those are customer questions.
You have spent 20 years in one organization. Why leave now?
That is probably the question I have been asked most often. The answer is not that I stopped believing in the organization. In fact, I leave with enormous respect and gratitude. But there comes a time when you ask yourself, what else can I build? I had spent 20 years helping build and grow an organization. I felt it was time to take everything I had learned and apply it to something of my own. It is a difficult decision because employment provides security. Entrepreneurship provides possibility, but also uncertainty. Eventually, I decided that I would rather try than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened.
What will you miss most?
The people, without question. I will miss the morning greetings, the difficult meetings, the celebrations, the unexpected problems, even some of the difficult customers. When you spend 20 years with people, they become part of your life. I will also miss the scale of the organization. When you are part of a large company, you have access to resources, expertise, and systems. Now I have to build those things.
What will you not miss?
Meetings that could have been emails. But seriously, every organization has frustrations. I will not miss bureaucracy. However, bureaucracy also teaches you something. When you leave a large organization and start a small business, you suddenly realize that some processes existed for very good reasons. You may dislike the process until you have to manage the risk yourself.
You have moved from being a senior executive to becoming an entrepreneur. What is the biggest psychological adjustment?
The loss of institutional authority. When you are a chief customer officer, people know your position. When you start a new business, nobody owes you attention. You have to earn it. You have to build your own brand. You have to find clients. You have to convince people to trust you. And you have to pay the bills. That is a completely different reality. The experience helps you, but experience alone does not guarantee success.
You have spent 2 decades in insurance. What is the biggest challenge facing the Kenyan insurance industry today?
Trust. I think trust remains one of the biggest issues. Many people do not fully understand insurance. Some people have had poor experiences. Others have heard negative stories from friends and relatives. And sometimes the industry has made itself unnecessarily complicated. We use technical language. We produce long policy documents. We explain products from the perspective of the insurer rather than the customer. The industry must become easier to understand. Insurance is already complicated because risk is complicated. We should not make the customer experience more complicated than necessary.
Many Kenyans only think about insurance after a loss. Why is that?
Because human beings tend to respond to visible problems. If your vehicle is damaged, insurance suddenly becomes important. If your business burns down, you immediately understand the value of business interruption insurance. But before the event, the risk feels abstract. That is why education is so important. The insurance industry cannot wait until the loss happens before explaining the value of insurance. We must help people understand risk before the crisis.
What is the future of the insurance intermediary? Some people believe technology will eliminate brokers and agents.
Technology will eliminate certain activities, but I do not believe it will eliminate the need for advice. The intermediary who simply sells a product may be vulnerable. The intermediary who understands risk, explains options, and helps a client make good decisions will remain relevant. The future is not necessarily technology versus intermediaries. The future is technology-enabled intermediaries. The best intermediaries will use technology to become faster and more efficient.
You have worked in an industry that is heavily regulated. Is regulation a burden or a necessity?
It is both. Regulation can sometimes create administrative burdens, but insurance involves public trust. People give insurers money today in exchange for a promise about tomorrow. That promise must be regulated. Without regulation, consumers can be exposed to serious harm. The challenge is to achieve the right balance. Regulation should protect consumers, strengthen professionalism, and promote a healthy industry without creating unnecessary barriers to innovation.
There has also been increasing emphasis on professionalism within the insurance industry. Why does that matter?
Because insurance is not simply a sales activity. You are dealing with people's money, livelihoods, businesses, and futures. A professional must understand the product, must understand the customer's needs, must disclose important information, must act ethically, and must continue learning. Professionalism is not simply about having a certificate on the wall. It is about how you behave when the customer is not watching.
What is your advice to young people entering insurance?
Do not rush to become a manager. First, become competent. Learn the business. Learn the technical aspects. Understand claims. Understand underwriting. Understand customers. Learn how money moves through the insurance value chain. And develop your communication skills. A person who combines technical competence with the ability to communicate clearly will always be valuable.
Let's turn to a subject that has attracted considerable public debate: the government's plan to introduce a motor vehicle circulation tax. What is your initial reaction as an insurance professional?
My first reaction is that we must distinguish between taxation and insurance. They are not the same thing. Insurance is a risk transfer mechanism. A motor vehicle circulation tax is a government revenue or policy instrument. The important question is how the proposed tax is designed and what problem it is intended to solve.
What concerns would you have?
The first concern is affordability. Motorists already face multiple costs: fuel, maintenance, insurance, licensing, inspection, financing costs, taxes, and levies. If another charge is introduced, the total cost of vehicle ownership may increase significantly. The second issue is compliance. If the cost becomes too high, some motorists may look for ways to avoid the system, and that could create unintended consequences. The third issue is clarity. People should understand, what exactly are they paying? Who is paying? How much? What is the money being used for? And how does it differ from existing charges?
Could such a tax affect motor insurance?
Potentially, yes. Any increase in the cost of owning and operating a vehicle can influence consumer behavior. Some people may reduce the level of insurance they purchase. Others may delay renewing their cover. That would be a concern because insurance is not optional in terms of the legal requirement for third-party cover. The policy objective should therefore be carefully considered. You do not want to create a situation where additional charges unintentionally contribute to more uninsured vehicles on the road.
What would you like to see before such a policy is implemented?
Meaningful stakeholder engagement. Bring in motorists, insurers, intermediaries, transport operators, manufacturers, consumer organizations, and the public. Good policy is better when it is informed by people who will actually experience its consequences. The government has a legitimate role in raising revenue and improving public infrastructure, but policy design matters. We should ask whether the tax is efficient, fair, transparent, and sustainable.
You are now moving into the brokerage space. What kind of brokerage do you want to build?
One built around advice and trust. I do not want to simply sell insurance policies. I want to help clients understand their risks. A client should know what risks they face, what risks they have transferred, what risks they have retained, what their policy covers, what it does not cover, and what they need to do when a loss occurs. That is the kind of relationship I want to build.
After 20 years in the industry, what is your definition of success?
Success is not simply the size of the company. It is the number of people whose lives are better because the organization exists. If a client suffers a loss and we help them recover, if we help a business identify a risk before it becomes a disaster, if we develop young professionals, if we build a business that is respected for doing the right thing, then I will consider that success.
Daniel, you have gone from intern to chief customer officer. Yesterday you left employment. Today you are beginning a new chapter. If you could speak to the young Daniel who walked into the insurance industry 20 years ago, what would you tell him?
I would tell him, be patient, learn everything you can, treat everyone with respect, never be afraid to start at the bottom. And understand that your career is not built in one dramatic moment. It is built through thousands of small decisions. The way you treat a customer, the way you handle a difficult colleague, the way you respond when nobody is watching. Those things eventually become your reputation.
And what should we expect from Daniel Omondi next?
I am building. That is the simple answer. I want to take everything I have learned over the past 20 years and use it to build something meaningful. It will not be easy. I expect challenges, but I am excited.
Daniel Omondi, former Chief Customer Officer, now entrepreneur. Thank you for joining us on Insurance World TV.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, remember, insurance is not just about buying a policy. It is about understanding risk before risk understands you. This has been Insurance World TV. Let's talk insurance.